Hello everybody, welcome to Movies by McManus, the channel where we break down movies, comics, TV, books, whatever type of media you're into, in the context of who created it and what effect it's trying to have on the world. Today, we're going to be doing something a bit different. Similar to my Dave and Atlanta breakdown, we're going to be looking at two movies that tackle the same subject, but in vastly different ways, and from vastly different perspectives. The two films we'll be looking at are 2020's Palm Springs, directed by Max Barbakow, and 2019's Vivarium, directed by Lorcan Finnegan. Now, in terms of actual plot, these movies couldn't be more different, but they're both metaphors for ending the adolescent phase of our lives, settling down and getting married, with Palm Springs having an optimistic outlook and Vivarium having a very pessimistic outlook. So let's start with a summary of Palm Springs, just because out of the two films, this one's my favorite. The two protagonists are Niles and Sarah, who are living the same day over and over again. With each time they fall asleep, the day starts from the beginning. Now, this plot probably seems familiar to you. It's been used in several films before, most notably in Bill Murray's Groundhog Day. But in Groundhog Day, while Bill Murray is reliving the same day over and over again by himself, Niles and Sarah are reliving it together. And this changes the message of the story and separates Palm Springs from other time loop movies. It creates a clear metaphor for married adult life. You see, in the beginning of the film, both Niles and Sarah are immature and unwilling to end the adolescent phase of their lives. And for many young people, settling down and getting married can feel like you're living the same day over and over again. However, Niles and Sarah learn to find peace in the repetition. Now they're free to do whatever they want and just be together. Another character named Roy, who's also stuck in a time loop, even finds more happiness living the same day over and over again than he did beforehand. Before they escape the time loop, it's revealed that there are actually multiple characters stuck in there with them, all of which have found peace in the repetition. Niles and Sarah do eventually escape, but once they get into the real world, they decide to live their lives the same way they did while they were trapped. So here we have the message of Palm Springs. Yes, settling down can be scary, and at times it can seem like you're living the same day over and over again. But if you're with the right person, then there can be some true beauty in this. Now, on the other hand, the message of the film Vivarium couldn't be more different. It doesn't show settling down or married life in a positive light, but instead as a trap. This film follows Gemma and Tom, a young couple who are brought into a housing complex looking to buy a home there. Then they are trapped by a very creepy realtor who seems as though he could be straight out of the Twilight Zone. And the movie just gets weirder from there. They keep trying to escape, but the housing complex seems to go on forever. And since all the houses look the same, they always just end up right back where they started. With nowhere to go, they end up staying in one of the houses. And a few days in, a child is dropped off at their front porch in a cardboard box, with a note saying raise the child and be released. In a twist that's completely predictable, the child ends up becoming evil. And the couple ends up hating each other after being trapped together for so long, with Gemma having to raise the evil child, and Tom constantly working, trying to find ways to escape. In the end, Tom and Gemma die from exhaustion, It's never explicitly said, but it's kind of assumed that the child is in fact stealing their life force. The child then grows up and goes out into the real world as a realtor to then trap more newlyweds. So as you can see, this movie is a lot more grim than Palm Springs, instead suggesting that settling down will eat you alive, until you're so broken down, you die, and you're replaced by your children. And while at times this film seems like it's just being overly pessimistic, it does tap into a lot of the fears of early adulthood. So let's discuss. Why two different views in two different movies? And how can two people have such wildly different ideas on the same topic? Well, for one thing, the movies are trying to pull out two different emotions from the audience. Palm Springs is trying to appeal to your hope, while Vivarium is trying to tap into your fear. While many people may not want to get married or settle down into adulthood, it seems more and more that that's not our decision to make. There's too much societal pressure to get married, to buy a house, and to basically become an adult. Not only this, but because of the current housing market, many young couples are stuck with someone they don't like, but are unable to break up with because they can't afford to live on their own. And with the growing cost of living, raising a child for young couples does almost seem like an impossibility. So, the anxieties brought up in Vivarium are kind of justified. But at the same time, things aren't all bad. There is a joy of starting a family and growing old with someone who you love. So it isn't naive to be hopeful for the future like Palm Springs tells us to. We still don't have a real answer as to why two different movies can have such different viewpoints. And I think for that we have to look at the two directors, Lorcan Finnegan and Max Barbakow. Lorcan Finnegan, the director of Vivarium, grew up in Dublin, Ireland. And that's important because in the early 2000s, Ireland went through a major housing crisis. Massive housing developments were constructed near Dublin, which were later left abandoned because the average person did not have the money to buy a home there. This became Finnegan's inspiration for the film, citing how eerie these completely empty housing developments were, but also talking about the anxieties of a young couple being crushed by the debt of a house they cannot afford. Max Barbakow, on the other hand, the director of Palm Springs, grew up in Santa Barbara, California. And while Santa Barbara, in general, is a more affluent area than Dublin, California and America as a whole went through a similar housing crisis in the late 2000s. So while similar events turned Finnegan into a pessimist, it did not do the same for Barbakow, despite being completely justified in doing so. And as simplistic as an explanation as this might be, it might just come down to the fact that Finnegan is Irish and Barbakow is American. Now, I know this explanation may seem like kind of a cop-out, but the fact of the matter is, Americans as a whole are much more optimistic for the future than the rest of the world is. Even speaking for myself, when watching Vivarium, I couldn't help but have this gut feeling that Finnegan was just being pessimistic for the sake of pessimism. But the truth is, American hopefulness is the exception to the norm. And we really don't have a lot of reason to be optimistic for the future, except for the fact that it makes us happy. And in the end, is that really such a bad thing? Movies are supposed to be an escape from reality. So while both directors see themselves in systems that they cannot escape from, Finnegan wallows in his depression of being trapped, while Barbakow finds the solution of creating your own happiness within the system you are trapped in. Now, I should bring up quickly, and I know I kind of get to this point a lot, but in our current system, the rich have the option of being optimistic, while the poor really do not. If we look at Palm Springs as a rich person's perspective and Vivarium as a poor person's perspective, then the characters of Palm Springs are not nearly as trapped as the characters of Vivarium are. Sure, wealthy people are also stuck in the mundanity of adulthood, but since they are not trapped under debt and low wages like poor people are, then they have a lot more freedom. It's also possible that I'm just reading way too much into Palm Springs. After all, it's a goofy comedy, and the thesis that marriage is good isn't exactly groundbreaking. But since overanalyzing is kinda what we do here, if you have any thoughts on Palm Springs or on Vivarium, feel free to share it with us below. And if you like this video, subscribe to our channel, check out our podcast, and follow us on social media at Movies by McManus. I'm your host, Greg, and have a good night.